There are two completely different ways of looking at psychology, two completely different ways of understanding what psychological therapy or psychotherapy is. And these two ways are mirror images of each other. So it doesn't make sense to say that one way is right and the other way is wrong. Because one way is right if you choose to look at it one way, but not right, not helpful if we choose to look at it the other way. And our big problem is we only have the one way of looking at things. We can't imagine that there could be another way. Our way is just so obvious to us, we can't see beyond it. So the first approach to psychology and therapy is to say that we know what it means to be a human being. We know what a person is, or should be, or shouldn't be. So this is the rational viewpoint. And this is the viewpoint that is so very obvious. We all would say, of course I know what it means to be a human being. Haven't I going around being a human being the whole time? Don't I meet lots and lots of other human beings and talk to them? And aren't we all pretty much on the same page? Haven't we all agreed? Isn't that totally agreed that this is what it means to be a human being and this is what human beings do and enjoy and don't enjoy? So that's what you could call the mechanical or rational approach to psychology. The other approach, the other complementary approach, is to say we haven't got a clue what it means to be a human being. We absolutely haven't a notion. Because being a human being is something entirely unexpected, something entirely unpredictable from the starting off point. And this is what Schumacher was getting at when he was talking about, when he was using the analogy of acorns. So he was saying that we live in a world full of acorns. We're all acorns. So instead of saying that we're human beings, let's just say, for the sake of the metaphor, we're all acorns. Some acorns are important, some are more menial, some acorns are real smart, some acorns aren't so smart, but it's all about the acorns anyway. And so we create a whole big thing, a whole big system to facilitate the life of the acorn. But the point of Schumacher's little metaphor is that acorns are nothing at all until we see them realized in terms of the potential that's in them. So an acorn is nothing at all by itself. It needs to go into the ground and grow into an oak tree. Now, when you look at an acorn, you don't see an oak tree. So, of course, we can say, well, the oak tree is a real surprise. How would you ever have guessed that this massive, mighty tree comes out of a little thing like that? So, from that point of view, if we were to devote all our efforts, as we do devote all of our efforts, into creating a nice environment for the acorns to live in, without any thought at all as to what might happen as a result of overvaluing the acorn phase and saying that the acorn phase is all there is and that there's nothing else apart from being an acorn. Obviously, we're denying our own potentiality and locking us into a very, very, very limited modality. So in that case, no matter how cushy the number is for us acorns, it's not going to be much fun because we weren't meant to carry on being acorns forever and ever and glorifying the state of acornhood. We're missing the point. We're too short-sighted. We're too concrete. We're too literal-minded and unimaginative. So we've condemned ourselves to an absolutely stupid existence. An existence without any real meaning, because the only meaning in life is the meaning of change. And I don't mean change in the sense of known change or change that leads to a known goal. And that's infinitely tedious and restrictive and obsessive. The type of change I'm talking about is a change, unexpected change, where something happens that we never saw coming because our imaginations weren't big enough to see it. So that's the only change that's really meaningful. It's the only change that would captivate our interest. Anything else is merely accountancy, bureaucracy. If we get rid of radical change, we get rid of everything. So everything we do on a therapy basis is directed towards reinstating the state of the happy acorn. So when the acorn existence becomes painful and not meaningful to us, we want to reinstate what we would call the good mental health of the acorn by whatever technical means we can. But what we don't understand is there is no such thing as the good mental health of an acorn when that acorn is considered to be the be all and end all, the alpha and the omega, and we're supposed to sit around congratulating on ourselves for being acorns and saying how great it is to be an acorn, etc., patting ourselves on the back. Which is, of course, what we do. We're doing that the whole time. So our endeavour, what we call mental health, is the endeavour to do an impossible thing. And even if it was possible, it wouldn't be a good thing to do, because we would be cutting off all of our potentiality. And the problem with the potentiality is it can't be demonstrated and it can't be believed in, really, because if we could demonstrate it, it wouldn't be a potentiality. And there's no way that we can grow into our potentiality without taking a risk. Because if someone could say, oh yes, this is definitely what's going to happen, don't worry, you just follow step A, B and C, that wouldn't be a risk and it wouldn't be potentiality. That would just be what we normally do, playing it safe, staying in the comfort zone, staying in the kindergarten because we're afraid to go out into the real world. So what we can say is that our approach to therapy, our approach to psychology, is to take the way that we all are at the moment as being the golden mean, that the point which we must all try and come back to, which is inherent in the idea of recovery. When we use the word recovery, it does kind of mean that if we get knocked out of the equilibrium zone and pushed into the unknown where things aren't what they're supposed to be anymore, then this can only be seen as an error, and that all of our efforts really involve returning to the equilibrium. So there's nothing adventurous about this at all. It's incredibly conservative. And an incredibly conservative approach like this, at the very best, we can eke out our frustrating, unfulfilling existence a bit longer before something happens that we can't do anything about. So the more we control, the better we are at controlling. The better we are at postponing what happens when we can't control anymore, which is growth. So genuine growth we don't control. Genuine psychological growth happens as a result. Happens despite us, not because of us. Control happens because of us. And it's just a delaying tactic. Control is holding on a bit longer because we're afraid of something happening that we don't understand, and that could be a bad thing. And from the acorn it could be said, yes, becoming an oak tree is a bad thing because the acorn has to die before the oak tree can start growing, which is akin to what Jesus said about the grain of wheat falling on the ground, that it has to die before the wheat can grow. So it's a very, very well-known principle, the sacrificial principle. Everything in life, as J.G. Bennett has said, is based upon this sacrificial principle. Sacrificial principle isn't logical, it isn't rational. You wouldn't do it. So if you're a rational being, a rational agent, you wouldn't do it because no one can say to you that it's a good idea to do. The whole point of sacrifice is that we let go of everything we've got without any guarantees. And that's the one thing we're never going to do when we're acting out of the rational mind. The rational mind doesn't do that. We can't expect the rational mind to do that. But as long as we're letting the rational mind call the shots, we won't do it. We will never go down the road of letting go because it doesn't seem sensible to us. And instead, we will condemn ourselves to a life of ongoing futility and missing the point big time. We're trying to big ourselves up and say, this is the point. It isn't the point. Whatever we think we've got, the point is to let go of what we think we've got, because only then can something different happen. And if something different doesn't happen, we're trapped in a repeat circuit of the same old stuff happening over and over again, which is meaningless. But we can keep on telling ourselves that it's meaningful and there's going to be a good thing happening as a result of us sticking to the script, which is like saying we're going to go to heaven if we behave properly. But that's not true. This non-risk approach of doing the right thing slavishly because we're hoping that that will work out for us won't work out for us. That's called fear. So we can't actually say anything about what a human being is, what a person is. The only way we can be so sure of ourselves when we define what it means to be a human being is when we're talking about the generic picture of what it means to be a human being, which is what the thinking mind produces. So in the last installment, I was saying that there are huge forces acting upon us to make us just be what society says we are, what other people say we are, what we ourselves are led to believe we are. And that once we do this, we become a regular human being. Regular human beings are regular because what's true for one is true for the next. And so we can get a standardized approach. We can treat people as standardized units where the same laws apply. But that standardized view of a human being is merely what it means to be a human according to the thinking mind. And the thinking mind doesn't know because it has no ability to look into or in any way appreciate this thing that I was calling potentiality. Potentiality does not exist for the thinking mind. It's either there on the table or it's not existing at all. the thinking mind cannot go beyond itself, and it can only calculate on the basis of what it knows to extend what it knows. By extending what it knows, the thinking mind can never know anything apart from what it knows. And what it knows is only a kind of a shorthand. It's only a kind of convention. It doesn't really mean anything. Because what's true can't be known. What's true can't be known because it is always transcending itself. It's always emerging. It doesn't have a final form that we can describe. It's a process of emergence, a process of surprise, a process of growth. And there's no way, as I was saying, to manage growth or to regulate growth. Growth has to happen by itself, or it's not growth at all. It's merely us controlling ourselves, which is obsessive and fear-driven, and will inevitably take us to a bad place. So with regard to the generic self, we can have generic therapies, and their aim is to return us to what our understanding is of what we should be as human beings, which is actually a state of denial of all potentialities. Such as to say, what you see is what you get, this is all there is, stop whinging, get on with it. Make this everything. So what we understand to be true now has to be made into everything, all there ever could be. And if there's any talk of anything else, we will dismiss that because we're sensible, we're hard-headed, we're logical. We're not going to waste time with all these nonsense of potentialities that can't be proved. And in one way, this dovetails with the popular approach to science, which says the popular version of science being that science knows everything, explains everything, will tell you what everything is, and will tell you tricks to do whatever it is you want to do. Only that isn't science at all. That's just how we use science in order to try and comfort ourselves. So we've lost the dogma of the church to a large extent, and we want to turn science into a dogma, but science was never a dogma, and as soon as it does become a dogma, it ceases to be science. It just becomes a comforting belief, which is what we're really, really into. For the generic self, rational therapy can work up to a point. In other words, it can work in the sense of extending the lifestyle, the lifespan of the generic self. So really the generic self can't exist without us supporting it, because it's not meant to be a permanent feature, a permanent state of affairs. What would normally happen is we'd get fed up of it, we'd see it we'd see what we have attained as a kind of a dead end, and we'd kind of give up, and then that act of giving up is how we progress. So it's not control that progresses us, really, it's letting go. We stop insisting that we know best and believing that we know best. But it can be seen very clearly that this isn't on any level a very happy approach. Instead of seeing an illusion for an illusion, albeit an illusion that was fitting at the time or helpful at the time, we make a dogma out of an illusion, and we try very hard to hang on to it, even though nothing good come out of it. Even if we can make that illusion palatable and livable forever and ever and ever, it's still an inferior existence. It's still a surrogate for life. It's not life, it's playing at life. We haven't left the kindergarten. We're just validating the kindergarten by saying the kindergarten is the whole world and anything else is not good, is not kosher, is not respectable, which is exactly what we always do when we limit ourselves due to fear. When we limit ourselves due to risk aversion, we validate what we're doing and we devalidate all other possibilities, because that's the only way we can feel good about it. So our culture has really embarked upon a massive exercise in validating the mind-created sense of self, which is very, very limited. We've created a playground for that generic identity. We've created a whole world for it. But even so, even with all the effort we put into creating a playground for the generic self still doesn't have a fulfilling existence within it, because it can't have a fulfilling existence anywhere, ever, because it isn't the point of the story. We could say it's a temporary phase, or that is a state from which we can be born as individuals. So very, very clearly it is possible to go around not realizing that one is generic in one's outlook and beliefs and the way one describes oneself. And we can keep on doing that and doing that. But due to the natural process whereby the false gets revealed as being false because it is too mediocre, it's too limited, it isn't really a good substitute for the real thing. It'll pass for a while, but then we'll start to realize that there's no wholesomeness in it, no nutrition in it. And then what happens is we discover within ourselves, as a result of the suffering in life, essentially, we discover who we are that isn't the generic self, and we learn to separate ourselves from that, not deliberately, but just through discernment. We learn to see what is us and what isn't us. And then we become more individual. We connected to the inside of ourselves, the inner life, rather than taking everything from the outside and trying to conform to the outside. So very oddly, what passes for therapy and has been taken over by collective knowledge, specialist knowledge, all of which means the outside. People on the outside know more about how you should be than you do. And whatever I might think or you might think, it's not really to be trusted, because it could be totally illusory. It could be just our own fancifulness. The only thing that we do believe in is what everyone else says, so we adapt to the outside world in an attempt to find mental health. But we'll never find anything at all resembling mental health by adapting to the outside, to the regular world, where there are maps and models and descriptions of how things should be. We'll only start to find mental health when we see through that and start to realize that even though we are enslaved by the need to find approval from the outside world, this need to find approval isn't actually a good thing. It's actually the very thing that's imprisoning us.